Good evening and a very warm welcome to First Issues. Botswana has just recovered from the worst El Niño-related droughts in 34 years. A recovery that allowed the nation to let out a collective sigh of relief after months of water rationing, economic strain and prayer. Access to piped water supply is said to be uneven, ranging from 80% in Gaborone to 20 to 30% in some other urban centers. And only 42% of rural households have access to proper sanitation. In addition, the World Bank says some 33% of all water supply in Botswana is lost through the Water Utilities Corporation distribution system. Recently, residents of Mupipi and Mokobatsane in Buteti sub-district had to resort to drinking water from burrow pits after their taps ran dry for weeks, sparking fears of waterborne diseases. What have these plans cost us in terms of industrial development? What concrete plans are there to reduce wastage and improve distribution? WUC Chief Executive Officer Metla Masire addresses our concerns.
I can confirm that we lose quite a lot of water. It's what we refer to as non-revenue water because we don't make money out of it. Now, the plan as it is we are trying to upgrade our networks. As a country, a lot of our reticulation is very old. We have started the upgrade. We've recently done Mahalape and Palape. So the intention is, funds permitting, it is to go through the major villages and start upgrading the network.
What are the timelines for this project? What are the set objectives and timelines? How much of a percentage are you looking to save?
A utility of this nature, we should be talking about probably about 15% to 20% losses. That is normal in the thing. We don't refer to it as losses as per se. It's non-revenue water because it's not all due to leakage. Some of the non-revenue water is water that is taken without our permission, illegal connections, bowsing, those activities that don't necessarily generate revenue for the organization.
Water is an integral part of economic development. What do we and what can we realistically promise potential investors with regards to water supply in Botswana?
Generally, in terms of the industry, commercially, we are not as bad as we are socially, because the challenge is actually when you look at our bulk supply water, we can adequately supply most of the mines and most of the operations reasonably well. So I'm comfortable that at this stage, we have got capacity for a lot of industry to still come into the country. Obviously, if those people where they reside, they don't have water, it causes unhappiness and can cause interruptions to the business. But from a commercial point of view, the factory and the mines and the operations, generally we can supply the right amount of water.
And there's room for more industry, you're saying?
There is room for more industry. Currently, our biggest challenge is not the volume of water we have access to. It is our ability to distribute that water. So we do have water at cost, we can distribute water to where we need to take it.
So despite our semi-arid status, we do have a good water supply.
We've developed a very good system, but let's put things into perspective. If we have a huge industry in the place like Tsabong, it would pose a lot of challenges for us because that area is one of the hard-hit areas. So I'm not suggesting that every part of the country will lend itself, but a good portion of our country, we can supply a reasonable amount of water because, as you know, the mines are in the middle of nowhere, and generally there is enough water to supply.
There are concerns that water tariffs in Botswana are relatively high compared to those of our neighboring countries. Is this true? And if so, why is this the case?
I can challenge anybody on that. First of all, water tariffs in Southern Africa are very low because Southern Africa, like Botswana, we subsidize for the benefit of our citizens. And I can confirm that Botswana is probably the lowest in the region in terms of water tariffs. So our water tariffs are heavily subsidized. I know the public doesn't always want to hear that, but that is the truth.
Where then do you think this perception comes from?
I think it's because as a country, we have been very supportive of our water distribution for a very long time, and it was really over-subsidized. So we've become in a comfortable zone. So any increase feels like a big increase.
So what I'm getting from you is that in the short term, our system should be operating at maximum capacity. We'll be down to losses of 15 to 20% as is the norm.
Not now,
Yes.
because we are still having to do a lot of work on the upgrade of the network. But once the network is upgraded, we should be talking around those figures, between 10 and 20, within that window. That is the sort of water losses that we should be.
So is this more of a long-term plan?
Yes, it is a long-term plan, because until we've reticulated most of the major villages, specifically Kanya and Molepolole, then we'll have covered most of the big villages.
When are we talking?
They are part of the NDP 11 plan, so within the next 3 or 4 years,
Okay.
they're scheduled within those windows.
Taking into account rapid urbanization as well as climate change, do you foresee any supply challenges in the future? What are our long-term plans with regards to water supply in Botswana?
It's actually I'm glad you asked, because that's a big challenge. And this is where, when you do our strategy, when you talked about water sustainability and long-term, this is why we are exploring water from outside. It must be noted that 60% of our water comes from underground. And as the droughts and as we use the water, the ability to recharge the aquifers is not looking good, especially given the climate condition we are in. So we have no choice that in future we need to find alternative sources of water.
Outside, where are we exploring?
We are exploring water from Lesotho, the Chobe Zambezi. We are even going as far as possibly considering desalination of water from the sea, from the Namibian side, because it's the nearest to us. So we are looking at all options. There are no cheap options. They're all expensive. So we have to look at and do the trade-offs and the risks, et cetera, to see what the country ultimately has to afford. I'm not saying can afford. It has to afford it, because that's the only way we're going to get water in future, from outside somewhere.
Many of you watching at home continue to entrust your hard-earned money month after month to pension funds, trusting that this money will be managed and invested with your best interest at heart, and that these contributions will allow you to continue to put food on the table long after you have retired from the working world. Many of us have taken no steps at all to better understand these structures that manage our money, and are therefore unable to hold them accountable or even know how to protect our own interests. In order to know the right questions to ask your pension fund, and to better exercise your power as a member to select the right people to represent your interests at a board, that is the trustee, do pay close attention this evening. Dr. Dina Dialen Kona explains the role of the trustee to us in full.
The role of the Board of Trustees is to have a collective of skills that work with the utmost good faith in the interests of the members and beneficiaries of the fund. The chairperson of the Board of Trustees is like the chairperson of any listed entity, and his role is to ensure good governance as far as the fund is concerned, to have an array of talent represented by the trustees as well as the principal officer that gives effect to having a fund that is soundly governed and that promises appropriate returns to members and beneficiaries are concerned. And then we have the individual trustees that need to act without any conflict of interest and in the best interest of the fund in conjunction with the principal officer who manages the fund on a day-to-day basis.
Who can be appointed to each of these roles? And I know you've just expanded on two, but could you please give us a breakdown of each one, their roles and responsibilities?
The Board of Trustees is normally made up of employer or sponsor nominated members, as well as members of the Board of Trustees that are nominated by the members or the beneficiaries of the fund. It could have an independent chairperson of the Board of Trustees. Board of Trustees are members that are individuals of sufficient caliber and skill that bring an independent mindset to the deliberations of the fund. The chairperson acts impartially and tries to engage with the various parties. The member nominated trustee serves on the board of trustees and will act impartially on the board, but will also make known what the wishes of the employer are. As far as the member will act impartially, but will also articulate what the expectations are of the members. And the principal officer is basically the chief executive of the fund that manages it on a day-to-day basis and ensures that the requests and the objectives and the wishes of the board of trustees is given effect in a practical sense.
How do you think we can improve member involvement in the management of their pensions, seeing that most people feel quite insignificant when it comes to talking about regulation and the administration of these funds, when they are essentially the owners of said funds?
Members need to understand that they have a vital role to play, and they need to be more involved as far as the business of the fund is concerned. They need to receive their annual statements to see what the projected benefits are. And a world statistic that we come across is that 85% of members retire poor, so that the pension that they receive is inadequate to sustain the lifestyle that they've become accustomed to. So by becoming more involved in the activities of the fund, the member would be able to project what the requirements are and then save towards that end so that they can retain purchasing power parity when they retire.
How can the average person make sure they educate themselves and are able to hold fund administrators accountable and fully exercise the power of their role?
Individuals need to familiarize themselves with the rules of the fund. They need to understand exactly the contributions that they are making on a monthly basis, together with the employer contributions, and the manner in which those contributions are utilized for administration purposes, as well as death benefits and investment purposes. So to that end, members need to receive and analyze surveys that give effect to the manner in which their particular contributions are being utilized and whether or not they are seeing real returns, and this on a compound basis would enable them to be more proactive in raising issues of concern and holding the board of trustees more accountable.
What is there, though, to reassure members that their money is safe?
There are so many checks and balances: the annual financial statements, the appointment of external auditors, the submission of returns to the registrar, as well as the valuation of the fund by the actuaries. So there are sufficient checks and balances that their funds are being utilized for the purposes for which they were intended.
Scandals sometimes occurring and mismanagement making the headlines. Can they rest assured?
They can rest assured. The examples that you mentioned are a minute fraction of the total population of funds that are being administered. You will find in all endeavors that there would be certain exceptions, and one needs to be in a position that you can take that into account in the big scheme of things. You need to see certain deviations, you need to see certain failures so that you can improve governance into the future. Those are the lessons that we take and ensure that better practice is followed going forward.
Members do have a say as to who represents them on the board. What types of skills and attributes should they look for in the people they do nominate for these positions?
It's a very important aspect that you raise. As far as members are concerned, they need to see that a board of trustees is representative, that it's got a skilled chairman with a unique set of skills, as well as the ability to lead the board of trustees. And members also need to ensure that there are finance skills, human resources skills, legal, compliance, and most significantly, investment skills that are represented on the board of trustees, so that they can deploy the funds in instruments and opportunities that will result in positive returns over the medium to long term. You need to apply your mind impartially, which means in the best interest of the fund, and from an ethics point of view, you need to avoid any conflict of any kind whatsoever.
Welcome back to First Issues. A 2016 PricewaterhouseCoopers report says that Africa has approximately 700 companies with annual revenues in excess of 5 billion pula. Of these companies, just 280 are listed. The 520 or so companies that are currently unlisted are said to point to the great potential for the growth of capital markets on the continent. We speak to the Executive Director of the Center for Financial Markets at the Milken Institute in the United States of America, Stacey Warden. We also speak to Pierre Celestine Rabukumba, CEO of Rwanda Stock Exchange, who helped start the Capital Market Development Project in Rwanda in 2004 while working for the Central Bank of Rwanda. Both professionals help us understand the role that capital markets can play in Africa's development story. First up is Stacey Warden, who says that all countries need to develop deep domestic capital markets to benefit people looking to save and grow their money and to help grow the private sector.
African countries and all countries actually need to develop domestic capital markets. Deep, liquid domestic capital markets generate that engine of growth where savers can put their savings into the most productive uses and the private sector can grow because it has access to capital. And so what you're always after is that kind of virtuous circle, between savings and investment and productive investment and growth.
What have you found to be the biggest hurdles to developing these deep capital markets?
Right. The biggest hurdle is always one of scale. So if you're a small country, you can almost do everything right, but you still don't have enough activity and enough scale to get, they say liquidity begets liquidity. So you need a certain amount of scale to kind of get going. And so this is why I tend to advise countries to think about regional integration and capital markets, cross-listing, having open borders with bigger neighbors, bigger economically diverse. The bigger of a diverse market you can generate, the more options you have for developing capital markets.
Speaking of regional integration, the viability of having a pan-African stock exchange, how viable do you think that would be?
I think it's a little bit tricky because the countries in Africa are quite different, and it's such a large continent and it's such a diverse kind of economy. I think it's much better to start regionally and kind of grow from there. So the East African community is working on better capital markets integration. You are as well in the SADC region, and I think that's probably the smarter approach.
Having looked at capital markets at the continental level, we now turn our attention to the national experiences of the Rwandan Stock Exchange for possible learnings. We have previously discussed the country's national economic turnaround strategy on our program and wondered whether its 5-year-old stock exchange was similarly as remarkable.
Well, there are three things we keep talking about in our developments. We just hosted the conference of all the stock exchanges last year in November, of which Botswana, of course, Stock Exchange has participated. And it was resonating about three things: innovation, education, and advocacy. That has come specifically from Rwanda Stock Exchange because innovation is very, very important in what we are doing, because technology is changing everything. The world is changing quite fast, so we can't do things the way we used to do them. That means innovation, you need to get outside of the box. That's one. So the issue of education, it's common all over the place on the continent. Save maybe for South Africa, it's a different market. It's the most advanced and the biggest market cap as far as I'm concerned, whereby people on both sides. That is the supply side or demand side. And professionals, you know, they need to be educated. There is a lack of information, a lot of that, and education around the capital market industry, which means that we have to do a lot of that. So in education, of course, you know, so it's also linked to innovation, because you have to use more ways, modern ways of educating people, not in classrooms anymore necessarily. You know, you are finding people using more creative ways of for educating or marketing for their products. Same goes for the capital markets, of course, indeed. By educating people, it means that you have to run to the social media nowadays, you know, and other means of communication, so that you can disseminate that kind of information you want to educate people about, because it's very, very important if you want to spread, if you want to deepen our capital markets and make them known. So then the last one, the last word of the three is advocacy. So we need to advocate for capital markets. That means from policymakers to regulators to the public in general. We need to advocate for capital market. We need to advocate, make everyone know that the capital market is a way of doing business. If you want to raise long-term capital, it's the cheapest. I mean, by all ways you look at it, the capital market is the cheapest way you can raise your long-term capital. But it needs, you know, it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop on the legal frameworks. When I talk about advocating for that, it means that you need to cover again the entire ecosystem. You need to talk for the companies which are going to be listed. That means you have to lobby governments for tax incentives, for example. You know, need to lobby governments, their own regulators in their own respective institutions, that we are, hey, this is our value addition, this is our value proposition as capital markets to help these companies whom we want to list. The moment they come list on the market, we follow them. We hold their hand to improve on their governance structures and their accountability issues. That means the taxman is not going to be running after them every day. We will be improving that if they come on board. And then we help them also on their own side as companies this time around. Say that, you know, the value we are giving you is that whole exposure, all the good things that this thing can bring to you, but you also need to do ABC. You know, we are going to help you with your regulators, for example. That's some way of adding more value to listed companies. You know, helping them with their own regulators will help you as regulators to make these guys comply, for example. You know, and it's in the end it all becomes win-win situation, whereby it's not just listing, but you're also helping the companies, and you are helping also governments and the stakeholders all together. They benefit from that. So those are the three words we are talking about in terms of capital markets deepening.
What do you make of tonight's conversations? Chat with us via Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or SMS. That brings us, however, to the end of our program. So it's good night from me, Namizo Samakula, and the First Issues team.